The portrayal of women in fighting video games. Fighting video games have been popular for decades, first coming out in the 1980s. Companies have made successful franchises that are world-renowned, like Street Fighter, Tekken, and Mortal Kombat. The basic principle of these games is that the player picks a character and faces off against an opponent. Fighting video games have become so popular that competitive tournaments are broadcasted on the esports platform. My fascination is with the representation of female characters in these games. Fighting games are notorious for having scantily clad women, which has correlation to the largely male industry and audience. Unless a person actively follows the industry, it can be difficult to recognize which character is a part of which franchise. This falls into Horkheimer and Adorno's idea of cultural sameness. The schematic nature of this procedure is evident from the fact that the mechanically differentiated products are ultimately the same. Even though Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and Street Fighter are different games, the products are eerily similar. Female characters are almost always slender, light-skinned, large-breasted, and provocatively dressed. The male characters are often designed with distinct muscles, show brute strength, and wear more clothes. The ability to keep going at all becomes the justification for the blind continuation of the system. What is repeated is healthy, the cycle in nature as an industry. Fighting game producers put out updated versions of their games as technology continues to improve. However, Horkheimer and Adorno could argue that these games are falsely advertised as new because many of the characters are reused. Notice the character Cursi Monteiro from Tekken. One version is her from Tekken 5 and the other is Tekken 7. The outfit and her body are exactly the same. This is because the game designers understand what appeals to the audience and wants to continue to capitalize on it. The audience for these fighting games is mainly young males, which sets the scene for the portrayal of these female playable characters. Laura Mulvey states, "The determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure, which is styled accordingly. In their traditional exhibitionist role, women are simultaneously looked at and displayed, with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact so that they can be said to connote to be looked at-ness." Let's look at the example of Cammy from Street Fighter. Note the pose. All of her assets are highlighted by the small amounts of tight fabric. The clothing is realistically impractical. Real martial artists do not fight in thongs and high heels. But in this fantasy world, the attire serves to fulfill the motive behind the male gaze. When the male player chooses the female character, he is controlling her, perpetuating the dominant versus submissive roles. Cammy would be at his command, with her body providing him voyeuristic pleasure. Mulvey mentions that the woman's appearance is coded to connote to be looked at-ness, which connects nicely with another theorist's idea. Stuart Hall's focus is the process of encoding and decoding through media and communications. In this context, the game designers are the producers, which encode messages into the game's content. The gamers are the consumers, which process those messages, consequently decoding them. However, what are called distortions or misunderstandings arise precisely from the lack of equivalence between the two sides in the communicative exchange. These miscommunications lead to tension between producer and consumer. Gamers who are unbothered by the way females are depicted in these games are taking the dominant hegemonic position, as they operate within the intended code from the game designers. The gamer buys a product and is pleased with its contents, happy to look at willingly exhibitionistic women characters. On the other hand, people may be bothered by the depiction of females and thus taking the oppositional position. Instead of enjoying the erotic images, the person sees the woman as being objectified, dislikes it, and resists the dominant code by protesting the game. Then there is the negotiated position, where a person accepts and rejects different parts of the code. In this situation, I personally take the negotiated position. I enjoy the video game industry and like to watch gameplay of these types of games, but I also acknowledge that there are problematic pieces. When decoding the messages of a producer, the consumer may want to speak out and become involved in participatory culture. Lisa Nakamura wrote an article called "Don't Hate the Player, Hate the Game," which exposes the trend of racism in the MMORPG World of Warcraft. She says, "Topics that the game industry may wish to avoid because they may seem divisive or may reflect badly on the virtual world are confronted frequently in participatory media created by its users. Participatory culture empowers the consumer because it creates a platform for the hegemonic ideas to be resisted. The creators of the fighting games initially have the power, but it can be challenged when the audience creates their own content that demonstrates their views. For example, the production company Rooster Teeth posted a video called Immersion: Fighting Girl Clothes, which illustrates how impractical the clothing actually is. They stage a fight with two real women, and the viewer can very quickly see how the clothes hinder their ability to move. The fight ending with one girl covering her breasts with her arm as her top is completely fallen apart. Rooster Teeth's conclusion is that the game's characters may be nice to look at, but there are sexist undertones. To summarize, the female characters in fighting video games are purposefully presented in a certain way that appeals to the majority of the audience, which is young men. These games are often similar, which aids in the capitalism of the male gaze. However, there is the possibility to challenge the status quo using participatory culture to voice the previously unheard opinions. Thank you.